You got the job offer. The number felt good, better than last year, better than the year before. You did the math, said yes, felt ahead for about 3 weeks. Then groceries hit, rent renewed, the car insurance renewed, and somehow by the end of the month, you were back in the exact same place. Not because you spent badly, but because the system was already moving while you were standing still. Most people stop the analysis right there. They blame the company for not paying enough. They blame themselves for not negotiating harder. They blame inflation as if it were a weather event, something that just happens, something nobody controls. But inflation is not a weather event. It is a managed variable. There are people whose specific job it is to decide how much of it the economy gets, and the tool they use to manage it runs directly through your paycheck. So sit with that one for a second. The thing that keeps eating your raise is not random. It has a mechanism, and the mechanism is built on purpose. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The frustration doesn't disappear. But I will say for me, it did stop feeling like a personal verdict on my self-worth. So let's build this carefully, because the logic is airtight once the pieces are in the right order. Starting with the Federal Reserve, it has 2 official mandates from Congress: keep prices stable and keep employment high. Those 2 goals sound like they work together, but they don't always work together. In fact, at the level of mechanics, they actively push against each other. The reason they do tells you everything about why your wages move the way they do. Because inflation at its core is what happens when too much money chases too few goods. When people have more to spend, sellers can charge more. When workers have more options, they can demand higher wages. Higher wages become higher costs for businesses, which become higher prices for consumers. And the cycle reinforces itself. To stop it, you need to reduce the pressure. You need people to have less spending power or fewer options. And that is not accidental outcome. That is a mechanism. Now, the part that most people don't know, and the part that nobody really tells you, the Federal Reserve does not fight inflation by making things cheap or cheaper. It fights inflation by making people less able to bid up prices. And the most reliable way to do that is to ensure that a portion of the workforce is always, at any given moment, out of a job. That is not a conspiracy theory. It has a name. Economists call it the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, and if you follow economic coverage at all, you will sometimes hear it abbreviated as NAIRU. The concept's straightforward. There is a level of unemployment below which wages start rising so fast that inflation becomes uncontrollable. The Fed's models define that floor, adjust it over time, and then calibrate interest rates to keep the actual unemployment near it. And right now, most mainstream estimates put the target somewhere between 4 and 5%. That means the system is considered functioning correctly when roughly 6 to 7 million Americans cannot find work. Not as a regrettable, side effect. This is a calibration point. So to see why, you got to zoom in on the labor market now and how wages actually get set. Because this is where the mechanism actually becomes very personal. Wages are not set by what work is worth in any abstract sense. They're set by negotiation, and negotiation is a power relationship. Your power in that relationship depends on one thing above almost anything else: your ability to walk away. If you can leave your job, if you can walk away, if you can say no and you can find another one quickly, you have leverage. Your employer knows it, you know it, the offer on the table reflects it. But if the job market's soft, if there's 8 people lined up to do what you do, your ability to walk away shrinks. You can't push as hard. You more often accept what is offered because the alternative is worse. Now, scale that dynamic across millions of workers at once. When unemployment is very low, workers across the country gain leverage simultaneously. Wages start rising broadly. Businesses have to compete for staff. That is individually good for workers, but it produces exactly the inflationary pressure the Fed is mandated to prevent. So the Fed acts. It raises interest rates, and higher interest rates make borrowing more expensive, which slows business investment, which slows hiring, which cools the labor market. You see where I'm going with this? You see the chain link here? People lose jobs or cannot find new ones. The pool of available workers grows, leverage shifts back towards employers, and wage growth slows and inflation comes down. Now that sequence it's not a malfunction, it's not a glitch. This is intended. This is happening on purpose. Your salary negotiation does not happen in a vacuum. It happens inside that structure. When you sit across from a hiring manager and push for more, your ceiling is partly determined by conditions that were set months earlier in meetings you were never invited to. You're never a part of. The benchmark the employer compares you against, the salary bands their HR team approved, the headcount freeze that was or was not in effect, all of that is downstream of interest rate decisions, which are downstream of inflation readings, which are downstream of a model that explicitly accounts for how many workers need to remain without jobs to keep the entire system as a whole stable. Now here's a little bit of missing info. The thing about your past raises, the ones that felt like wins, the 4%, the 5%, the once in 5 years, 8% that felt significant, inflation is just running alongside every single one of them. And in some years, it ran ahead. In years like 2021, 2022, it ran well ahead. A 5% raise in a 7% inflation environment, that's not a raise. Do the math. It is a cut with a positive number attached to it. The system moved. You stood still, or you actually moved less fast than the system, actually. And the math settled into exactly the place you recognize, back where you started. And this is not because your employer is necessarily acting in bad faith. No, some are, sure, but some are not. But even a generous employer is operating inside a labor market that is deliberately kept loose enough to prevent wages from rising faster than the Fed's model allows. To prevent wages from rising faster than the Fed's models allow. The constraint is not primarily in the boardroom. It is in the policy framework. The boardroom just benefits from it. And that's the part that tends to land oh so softly. You are not behind because you're bad at managing money. You're behind because the system carries a built-in drift, and your salary is structurally unlikely to outpace it. So in this example, the shame you're feeling right now in your chest about your financial situation, wrong address. Now we're going to zoom back to the individual. This is where the reframe matters. You probably felt at some point, or you felt that your financial situation was a reflection of your effort or your choices or some personal deficiency. Those are the people who feel like financially stuck. They experience it this way. They feel like there's something wrong with them. And that feeling is honestly one of the most reliable products, honestly, of a system that keeps the pressure just uncomfortable enough to be motivating, but not so extreme that it produces mass political reactions. Say the treadmill metaphor, for example, but it describes the mechanical reality. You run, the belt moves at the same calibrated rate by people you've never met, using models built around keeping a portion of the workforce exactly desperate enough to prevent the rest from getting too much ground. So, now that you're aware of this, what changes? The first thing that changes is your negotiation posture. If wages are constrained, all right, here's a bit of negotiation advice. If the wages are constrained by a labor market being slack, then your individual leverage matters more at the margins than you might have thought. You're not just negotiating against your employer, you're negotiating inside a system-wide constraint. And that means timing matters. Timing's important because labor markets shift. The Fed does not hold rates forever. When the market tightens, your window opens. So paying attention to these macro events, these macro things, you'll be able to recognize a cycle that gives you information about when to move, when to push, when a competing offer carries real weight versus when it's just a bluff the employer knows that they can call. Now, the second thing that changes is how you read economic news. When you hear that the unemployment rate dropped below 4%, markets are nervous, you now know what nervousness means. It means workers are gaining leverage, which means wages might rise, which means the Fed may act to cool it. That specific sequence, lower unemployment leading to market anxiety, used to look like an abstract thing. It didn't make sense. But now it maps directly onto your next performance review, your next job search, your next conversation about compensation. All of that is being affected by this. You're reading the same data from inside the structure rather than from the outside. And I would hope at this point feeling less confused about why good news for workers makes people anxious. Now, the third thing that changes is quieter. It is the internal conversation you've been having with yourself every time the month ends badly. The one where the evidence points to you as the source of the problem. Put that one down, right? The system was operating as designed. You're not failing at a fair game, okay? This is not a fair situation. You're playing a game whose rules were never meant, frankly, to be posted on the wall. That's not a reason for paralysis. Knowing the rules of a rigged game is better than not knowing them at all. You can make better choices about where to direct your energy. Which career moves carry structural tailwind? Which ones are swimming against a policy current? You can see which expenses are products of a system offering you consumption on credit before your wages can actually support it, and which ones genuinely serve your future. And now this channel exists to walk you guys through the mechanics underneath the financial life you're already living in. Not telling you what to do with your money, but to show you the system your money is moving inside of, and showing you clearly enough that your choices now start to become actual choices rather than just reactions to pressures that you couldn't put a name to. The treadmill analogy or story that I brought up, it doesn't fully disappear, sure, but the structure has not changed. Stops being a mystery though. You know what speed the belt is and who controls it now. That's way different from being stuck. That is the beginning of moving with information instead of moving with guilt. If that's what you're here for, stick around, subscribe, because there is more to see.